We have a very distinguished newspaper, pink paper, having had a very successful program, the Global Business Summit, which I believe yesterday has surpassed most other programs of its genre. And I think flush with the excitement of what you've seen and heard yesterday, the big picture story that Prime Minister Modi has unveiled last evening. I don't know whether the mood of the House is for too much of detail. The mood of the House is for a staid address either on the infrastructure sector or on the energy sector. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to be with Professor Jagdish Bhagwati, somebody we have all looked up to, sir, somebody we have all learned so much from, and a person I personally hold in the highest esteem. His colleague is now the Vice Chairman of the Niti Aayog, a very, very big responsibility on his shoulders. And I do believe, and this government does believe, that all that Professor, you and Arvindji have done together will help him serve the country very well, will help him perform his duties well. And I'm sure he will continue to receive your guidance, your support, your encouragement, and the vast knowledge that you have accumulated over the years. It's indeed a privilege once again to meet you, and again a privilege to be with you this evening. You all heard yesterday the Prime Minister talk about the big picture vision that India has. There will always be the naysayers, there will always be the persons who would like to deride any and everything that one wishes to do. I know that when I set the targets in the infrastructure ministries under me, whether it was the coal ministry, whether it was the power ministry, also the renewable energy ministry, the typical question was one of disbelief. There was hardly anybody willing to believe that India can do it. But I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, if at all the country has lost out on some of these opportunities in the past, I don't think it was because of lack of ability to do it. I'm convinced it was clearly the lack of vision, the lack of decisive leadership, the lack of the to-do attitude, the lack of willingness to bite the bullet, to take bold steps when it comes to whether it's reform, whether it's dealing with maybe unions, dealing with political opposition, dealing with the pink papers, if I may. In all of this circumstance, I think if one was to hold steady to the task ahead of him, if one was to stay the path undeterred by the obstacles, India could have done a lot more. And 67 years after independence, we would not be sitting here in this room and trying to discuss how we are going to build India, why infrastructure should be the imperative of India so many years after independence, why it should be important for us to deliberate that it's the government's job to unshackle the infrastructure sector. And in that sense, if you ask me, a very, very appropriate topic for today's panel discussion, a very interesting subject that most people in the country are grappling with, problems of the sort that you and I face. We have power cuts, we have load shedding, we all have probably got diesel generators in our homes and offices. We are importing large amounts of commodities which should have been mined or produced in India. We have joblessness, we have growth without jobs being created. We have a situation where every process is seen with a certain degree of trepidation, suspicion. This sense that we inherited when Prime Minister Modi was sworn in was one of an aspirational India, nearly 300, 400 million people in the middle classes yearning for a better quality of life, another 300 odd million people below the poverty line, And less focus was found on efforts to ameliorate their poverty, get them out of poverty, than the amount of time and space we spent, whether in the political arena, whether in the media, whether in economic summits, everywhere. The discourse in the country was what should be the BPL line. Rather than focusing our energies on getting rid of poverty, the scourge of poverty, we were more concerned and struggling with defining BPL, and we landed up in a situation that a nation of 1 billion people are fighting to come below the poverty line rather than aspiring to get out of the poverty line. And in that sense, infrastructure, to my mind, holds the key to the change that you and I want to see in India. There was a time we used to invest heavily into capital goods, into capex as a nation. I remember in the opposition benches, we had much more time to do research about history or economic history of India. And I used to scrupulously calculate the investment in capex, investment in revenue expenditure of the government, both plan and non-plan. I was struggling to see where the nation has gone since liberalization post-91, and whether truly we have as a nation been able to focus our money, focus our capital. And there can be no denying that India has a scarcity of capital. But rather than focusing that capital on building assets, on capex, the country tended to sway the path towards revenue expenditure, towards political expenditure, towards election-oriented expenditure. And what we saw, particularly in the last few years, was a consumption-led growth rather than an investment-led growth in this country. It is that aspect of the economy which I believe we need to change, which to my simple economic understanding is the critical turnaround that India will see and witness and benefit from if we can move from an economy focused on entitlements to an economy which has an empowered set of citizens in the country. And in that sense, the new government, in several aspects, one can take any aspect of our working, whether it is the conversion of the crisis of the coal deallocation, the cancellation of 204 blocks being converted into a great opportunity to open up the sector, to get private players, to get technology, to get expertise, to create new jobs. Whether it was the opportunity of falling crude prices to deregulate the entire sector, though we deregulated before the prices started falling. The intention was to completely do away with government controls, just like we had done in the Vajpayee regime. Prime Minister Vajpayee had deregulated petroleum and diesel prices. It is an unfortunate scenario that we reversed the wheel and went back to regulation. We inherited a sector where there was uncertainty on gas pricing, there was uncertainty on the amount of subsidies the nation will have to continue to pay. And I'm tremendously pleased that while we are opening up the sector, we are also calibrating it to be both economically wise and politically wise. It makes no sense to be foolhardy about certain things. So I often get the criticism, and again, several editorials have been written about the failure of the government to completely denationalize the coal industry. I often jokingly say that the same people who have been demanding that we should just open up everything and privatize all sectors, should there have been a situation where the resultant unrest in the people of India, in certain sections of the people of India, could have caused a drastic fall in production of, let's say, minerals or coal or electricity, the same set of people who are demanding opening up would then be attacking the government. Is this the Achhe Din that we voted you in for? So I do believe it's important that reform, rationalization, restructuring are all understood in the context of the political economy that we have in the country. And within that context, if one can calibrate the entire process, one can introduce competition into the system, one can ensure that the public sector and the private sector coexist as we roll out the infrastructure, as we address the infrastructure imperatives of India. I believe that is the way to go forward. That is the way to achieve results. That is the way to make it politically and economically a sound business proposition. And in that, the government's role can only be one of an enabler. The government cannot micromanage. The government's job is not to run businesses. The job of the government is to facilitate businesses. The job of the government is to make it easier to do business, to work in India. And by business, on a wider context, it could even include agriculture. Agriculture is a business of the farmer. So whatever activity each one of us is doing, if the government can only help us do it better, help us do it more efficiently, make sure that impediments don't come on the way, help in facilitating maybe better quality education, run a good skill development program to make the people employable or capable of doing some better work in their life. I think these are the imperatives which government has to do. But the end of the day, the government will depend on a partnership with the private sector. One will look for a joint venture. We can call it the public-private partnership mode. We can call it the public-private-people partnership mode, as Prime Minister Modi often alluded to. But the fact is that unless all stakeholders are on board on your plans, your ideas, you may land up with economic theory, you may land up with very, very fancy sounding programs, but the resultant would be probably far short of what is the potential, the true potential of India. Prime Minister Modi spoke about the $20 trillion GDP opportunity in India. In fact, if you ask me, it's completely doable, it's completely achievable, probably in a lesser time frame. If all of us were to work in a joint venture, in an atmosphere of mutual trust, on the one hand, government works honestly. On the other hand, the private sector works honestly. I mean, we can't have a situation where the private sector is wishing to corner the assets, the natural resources of the country and corner them cheap, or is only looking at what is in it for him rather than even for a moment bothering about what is in it for the country. Prime Minister Modi has often talked about the organic entity. The organic entity is not only the government. A senior official mentioned that, sir, this will result in a loss of 2,000 crores to my PSU. And I remember the anguish with which the Honorable Prime Minister turned to me and asked me a question. And as I look back on that afternoon, it really was a defining moment for me. And I hope if I can convey this message to all of you and through the good offices of the Economic Times and the Times of India group, if this can go to the people of India, his question and anguish to me was, and I'll say it in Hindi because he said it in Hindi and translated. He said, "Kab tak hum is desh mein ek company ya ek department ke profit and loss ko dekhte rahenge? Kabhi kisi ne is desh ke profit and loss ki chinta ki hai kya?" For you, sir, till when will we look at the profit and loss account of an individual company or a department of the government of India or of myself? When will the people, when will somebody think about the profit and loss of the country as a whole? And in fact, that to my mind can change the very way we look at things, the very way we work, the very way we do business, the very way we take decisions, whether in the public sector or the private sector. And if we can together take this as a message, whether it is for the success of our business, whether it is for the success of our own aspirations, and whether it is for the success of the mission to eliminate poverty in this country, I think a little bit of optimism, a little bit of self-confidence, and a little bit of commitment to the cause will give this country far better results than the kind of skepticism and cynicism that has set into our DNA. Obviously, one can easily envisage India going to a 7%, 8%, maybe even a double-digit growth. One can quite easily look at inflation coming under control. And we have a track record to prove it. Prime Minister Vajpayee had inherited a similar situation to what Prime Minister Modi has inherited. A 4-ish% growth, inflation in double digits, huge current account deficits, huge fiscal deficits, a falling value of the rupee, joblessness. But in that 6-year period, through sheer fiscal prudence, through consolidation of government spending, through a focused approach on infrastructure creation, and all of you are witness to what happened in that period. The kind of roads that were built up, the kind of telecom networks that rolled out during that period, the focus that one saw on the port sector, on the airport sector, the communication revolution that came, the connectivity that came into the country at that point of time, whether it was rural roads, the highway program. I believe Prime Minister Modi has this opportunity, which we are all working towards, to once again reignite the investment cycle. This cycle can best be kick-started with a focused effort to bring back money into the infrastructure sector, and money will come into the infrastructure sector when the investors have confidence in the economy. I remember while I was sitting here yesterday at your program, at the inaugural, a business person from India mentioned, and since we were going to go to Davos, I thought that was a very interesting observation. He said the world will invest in India once the Indians start investing. And I'm immensely pleased, particularly after the success of Vibrant Gujarat, which I don't know if Mr. Arun Jaitley mentioned it yesterday, which almost took the wings of a Vibrant India summit this time around, with the kind of delegations, the kind of enthusiasm we saw from countries around the world. We believe that India is there, India is happening. The Indian investors are coming back into the market. We see investors going to the stock market. We see a renewed interest in investing in the power sector, in the mining sector, in the steel sector. I believe in the days to come, with the focused effort on the Make in India program, coupled with the digital revolution that we are working towards, and the skill development initiatives to create a pool of skilled manpower in this country, we can clearly look at infrastructure driving growth, infrastructure achieving that 1 trillion investment target that was expected in the 12th plan, even as per the old documents. We did not factor in our ambitious plans to double the coal production, to take renewables to 5x what they are, to get power into the homes of every home 24/7, into businesses, into industry. Probably once these get factored in, the $1 trillion investment in infrastructure can be rewritten, and we can look at a far bigger thrust, whether it's the telecom sector, the railway sector, the defense manufacturing, irrigation, roads, renewables, coal and other mineral mining, oil and gas pipelines. This is a country of opportunities, ladies and gentlemen. 1 billion people yearning for more. An aspirational India. An India which wants a better quality of life. I think you cannot look for a better business opportunity. India today presents probably the world's biggest and most exciting business opportunity. Come and invest in India. Thank you.